Okay, let's unpack this. We are dedicating this entire deep dive to, well, what I think is one of the most intellectually compelling perspectives in criminal justice, the social structure theories of criminology.
Yeah, compelling, and you could even say pretty radical, because it really forces us to shift our gaze. For so long, the talk around crime was all about the individual, their psychology, their biology, maybe moral failings.
Right, the bad apple idea.
Exactly. And these theories basically say, hold on, maybe stop looking only at the person. Start looking at the street corner they live on, the community, the economic system they might be, well, trapped within.
That's the core. So our mission today, for you listening, is to get a handle on how the environment, your neighborhood, your socioeconomic status, the actual structure of your community, how that can fundamentally shape behavior and ultimately impact crime rates.
We're digging into sources that lay out the whole story, the history, the theories themselves, and importantly, the policy ideas that actually come out of looking at things this way.
And what's fascinating, I think, is how these theories flip the script on blame, right?
Completely. The argument at its heart is that crime isn't just some individual failing. It's often a function, a symptom, maybe, of bigger issues, social disorganization, economic conflict, especially in societies that are really stratified, layered.
Oh, if the structure itself is shaky, you can't really expect perfect behavior from everyone inside it.
That's the idea. So for you, the listener, the goal here is to get a really clear picture of the three main branches of this thinking. We've got social disorganization, strain theory, and cultural deviance.
And how they connect the dots, between things like poverty, lack of opportunity, and why some areas seem to become these persistent hotspots for crime, almost no matter who lives there.
Exactly. It's about those natural areas for crime.
Okay, so to really grasp these ideas, we kind of have to go back to the beginning, to the historical groundwork that even allowed criminology to think this way.
Right. We need to talk about the mid-19th century and the huge role of some early sociological pioneers. Because before you could analyze social structure, well, you need data, you need facts.
And that's where someone like Adolf Quetelet comes in.
Precisely. Quetelet was massive. He insisted on using data, using statistics in crime research. Sounds obvious now, maybe?
Yeah, we just assume data is part of it.
But back then, moving the study of crime away from just moral philosophy towards actual scientific measurement, that was a huge leap. It let people see patterns, trends they couldn't spot just anecdotally.
And building on that statistical foundation, you get thinkers like Emil Durkheim. And he comes up with this idea about crime that frankly still feels a bit jarring today.
Oh, definitely. Durkheim defined crime not as some mistake or, a breakdown of society. He called it a normal social event, even necessary.
Necessary. Okay, that sounds totally backwards. How is crime necessary?
Well, Durkheim argued it's inherent. It exists in every society, basically, because it serves a function. It helps define and reinforce our collective moral boundaries.
How so?
When a crime happens, the community reacts, right? There's outrage, discussion, punishment. And that whole process reaffirms what we as a group consider acceptable or unacceptable behavior.
So it clarifies the lines.
Exactly. He even argued, kind of radically, that if a society somehow became like a society of saints with no crime, we'd just start defining minor slips, things we barely notice now as criminal, just to keep those boundaries clear, to maintain that social definition of who we are.
Wow. So the goal isn't zero crime, because that's impossible and maybe even undesirable from a social function perspective. It's managing the boundaries. That's a very different way of looking at it. Anti-moralistic almost.
It is. And this whole sociological way of thinking really found its key home base in the U.S. in the early 20th century, specifically with the Chicago School.
The Chicago School. They really cemented this idea of sociological positivism, didn't they? The belief that you can actually study social forces scientifically, measure them.
They did. They were pioneers. These scholars, they literally went out into the city, into the bustling, often chaotic, rapidly growing Chicago. They didn't just theorize from an armchair.
And what did they find out there?
Their core finding, the big takeaway, was that social forces within these urban areas create specific, kind of predictable conditions. They call them natural areas for crime. It established this fundamental link. Crime rates are tied to social ecological conditions.
Meaning the neighborhood itself, the environment, not just the latest group of people moving in.
Exactly. The place had characteristics that fostered crime, regardless of who lived there.
Okay. That insight leads us right into the socioeconomic reality that underpins all these theories. The fact that society is, stratified.
Yeah.
Layered.
Yeah, our sources are very clear on this. The U.S., like most industrialized places, is stratified. You've got your typical layers, upper, middle, and lower class citizens. And this isn't just a label, it's a structure. It fundamentally shapes who gets what resources, what opportunities.
So when we talk about the lower class in this context, what are we really describing? What are those conditions?
We're talking about some really tough, persistent stuff. It's not just low income. It's often inadequate housing, poor healthcare access, family lives that are constantly disrupted by external stress like unstable work.
And underemployment, too, right? Not just being jobless, but stuck in low-wage, precarious work.
Absolutely. Pervasive underemployment. And all of this can breed this really deep, crippling sense of despair, a feeling that you just don't have control over your life.
And that creates this central tension, this paradox they talk about.
Yes, the paradox of material success. It's agonizing because people in lower class situations, they're swimming in the same culture as everyone else, a culture that constantly, aggressively pushes images of wealth, success, consumption.
Buy this, achieve that, look like this.
Right, it's everywhere. But, and here's the paradox, they are structurally blocked from seriously competing for that success. The pathways that are open to, say, upper or middle class folks, they're often closed off due to systemic barriers, poor schools, lack of networks, discrimination.
So you're told you should succeed, but the tools are kept out of reach.
Precisely.
Oh.
And that structural failure, that inability to integrate everyone into the mainstream opportunity structure, combined with the material hardship, well, that creates the conditions for what some sociologists call the underclass, often linked to this idea of a culture of poverty.
Okay, let's unpack that phrase, culture of poverty, because it sounds potentially loaded. What characterizes it beyond just lack of money?
It is a debated term, for sure, but the way our sources use it, it points to a set of psychological and social consequences that can emerge from that persistent deprivation and blocked opportunity. We're talking about things like a deep-seated apathy, maybe cynicism about the future.
A feeling of helplessness.
Yes, profound helplessness, and really critically, a pervasive mistrust of major social institutions.
Which institutions are we talking about?
Think about the key ones: schools, government agencies, law enforcement, the police. If your experience and your community's experience with these institutions has been negative or neglectful or even hostile, you start to see them not as resources, but as external forces, maybe forces of control.
So you don't engage. If you're cynical about schools, maybe you don't push your kids as hard, or you don't see the point.
Exactly. Or if you feel helpless about government, why bother voting or getting involved in community action? And if you deeply mistrust the police, well, you're definitely not calling them when there's trouble. You handle it yourself, or you just endure it. Cooperation just breaks down.
And the impact on kids, especially young kids, must be just devastating.
It is. The research is pretty clear here. Poverty experienced in early childhood, during those crucial developmental windows, that seems to have a much more severe, more lasting negative impact than poverty hitting later on.
It sets them back right from the start, cognitively, educationally.
Yeah, it creates this deficit that just compounds over time. It's harder to catch up.
And we also have to talk about how this isn't evenly spread across the population.
No, tragically, it's not. The sources highlight that these structural problems hit minority groups particularly hard, often due to a long history of, frankly, inadequate social effort to really integrate these communities into the economic mainstream.
Disparities are stark.
They are. Statistically, Latino and African American children are more than twice as likely to be poor compared to Asian and white children. That points to a systemic failure, doesn't it? A failure of investment, of providing equitable access.
Okay, so that's the grim reality, the stratified foundation. Now, how does criminology explain the crime that can result from this? That brings us to the first big theory, social disorganization theory.
Right. And this flows directly from that Chicago schoolwork we mentioned. Social disorganization theory looks squarely at the conditions within the urban environment. It asks, what happens when the social fabric frays? When the collective mechanisms that are supposed to regulate behavior just fail?
And the classic work here, the foundational stuff, is Shaw and McKay, right?
Shaw and McKay. Absolutely groundbreaking. They didn't just map where crime happened in Chicago. They mapped indicators of social decay alongside it.
Yeah.
And they found these incredibly stable patterns, high crime rates sticking to specific neighborhoods for decades.
And what characterized those neighborhoods?
Their key insight was about transitional neighborhoods. These were usually the areas right next to the central business district. Lots of poverty, yeah, but also a constant influx of new immigrant groups or internal migrants, people moving in from the rural South, for example.
Yeah.
And crucially, high rates of population turnover.
People always moving in and out.
Exactly. And think about what that means. People don't put down roots. They're not investing in their homes long term. They're not forming strong bonds with neighbors. Because why bother if you or they might be gone next year?
So there's no buy-in to the community.
Right. And without that investment, without that stability, the community loses its capacity to, well, organize itself, to exert social control, to get people to stay and actively defend the neighborhood against crime and disorder. It's hard to run a block watch if you don't know anyone or if everyone's transient.
They had that model to visualize it too, the concentric zones.
Yes, they mapped Chicago into these 5 rings, spreading out from the center. Zone 1 was the loop, the business district. Zone 2, right around it, was that zone in transition.
And that's where the crime was highest.
Consistently. For decades. And here's the kicker. It didn't matter which ethnic or racial group was living there at the time. Irish, Germans, Italians, Poles, African Americans. As each group moved in, experienced the conditions of Zone 2, their crime rates went up. And as they became more established and moved out to Zone 3 or 4, their crime rates went down.
That's huge because it directly challenged the racist ideas common at the time, right? That crime was somehow inherent to certain groups.
It completely dismantled it. Shaw and McKay showed pretty definitively. The problem wasn't the people, it was the place. The zone itself, its lack of social cohesion, its inability to provide structure and control.
And what happens when that formal and informal structure is weak? When the community fabric is torn?
Well, that's when you see law-violating youth groups, gangs, starting to form. They step into the vacuum. They provide an alternative structure, a source of status, recognition, maybe even protection that the weakened legitimate institutions, families, schools, community centers just can't offer effectively anymore or aren't trusted.
Okay. Now, later thinkers built on this, didn't they? The social ecology school.
Yes, they expanded the focus a bit. They still talked about community deterioration and economic decline, but maybe put a little less emphasis on, say, value conflict between groups. They really zeroed in on the physical signs of decay, too.
Like what?
Things like chronic unemployment being highly visible, actual physical deterioration, boarded up buildings, graffiti, abandoned cars, rundown parks. These things aren't just ugly. They send a powerful signal.
A signal that nobody cares.
Exactly. That social control is weak or absent. And that perception creates fear among residents. People retreat indoors, avoid public spaces, trust breaks down even further. It becomes a vicious cycle.
Less eyes on the street.
Precisely. They also talked about concepts like racial threat, how sometimes, as minority populations grow in an area, the dominant group might react with fear, leading to more punitive policing or social control measures, which can actually worsen tensions and disorganization.
Okay, so that's the disorganization side.
Yeah.
But there's a flip side, right? What happens when communities do manage to hang together?
Ah, yes. This is where it gets really interesting, I think. The opposite of social disorganization is what researchers now call collective efficacy. And it's seen as a key protective factor against crime.
Collective efficacy. What does that mean exactly?
Think of it as social cohesion plus shared expectations for action. It's the community's belief in its own ability to organize and maintain order. It's about mutual trust among neighbors, combined with a willingness to intervene for the common good. Like, we look out for each other around here.
And how does that work? How does it control behavior?
It relies on basically 3 interconnected types of social control working together. First, there's informal social control. That's neighbors watching out, maybe telling off kids who are misbehaving, keeping an eye on each other's property, just generally maintaining standards informally.
Just being neighborly, but actively so.
Right. Second, institutional social control. This is where schools, churches, community centers, libraries come in. They organize activities, provide mentorship, reinforce positive norms, connect people. Strong local institutions are vital.
Okay. And the third?
Third is public social control. This involves the relationship with formal agencies, primarily the police, but also other city services. Is policing seen as effective, legitimate, and responsive to community needs? Do people trust the authorities?
So when all 3 of those are strong and working together,
you get high collective efficacy. And the research shows that where collective efficacy is high, even in relatively poor neighborhoods, Kids are significantly less likely to get involved with delinquent peers or engage in crime and other problem behaviors.
It's like the community's immune system against crime.
That's a great way to put it. This shared trust, this willingness to act, it really acts as a powerful organic buffer. It can neutralize some of the negative effects of poverty or instability. It really shifts the focus from just managing crime after it happens to actively fostering the community's own capacity to prevent it.
Okay, so if social disorganization theory tells us the neighborhood structure itself can break down and fail to control crime, the next big branch, strain theory, asks us a different question, right? It looks more at the individual's psychological response to that structure.
That's a perfect way to frame it. Strain theories start with the simple, powerful premise. Most people in society, regardless of class, actually share similar values and goals. They want similar things.
Like what? The good job, the nice house, financial security.
Exactly, the standard markers of success in a capitalist society. But, and this is the crucial but, the legitimate opportunities, the pathways to actually achieve those goals are not evenly distributed. They're heavily stratified by socioeconomic class.
So the system sets up these goals for everyone, but doesn't give everyone a fair shot at reaching them.
Precisely. And that sharp division, that gap between the culturally approved goals and the structurally available means, that's where the strain comes in. It creates this pressure cooker of frustration, envy, mistrust, anger.
Which can boil over into crime.
It can drive some individuals towards aggression, violence, or finding illegitimate ways to achieve that success they feel they're unfairly denied.
And the roots of this idea, again, go back to Durkheim, with his concept of anomie.
Yes, Durkheim laid the groundwork. He described an anomic society as one where the rules of behavior, the norms, values, customs that usually guide us, have broken down or become unclear. People feel sort of adrift, morally rudderless.
And when did he think this was most likely to happen?
Durkheim linked it specifically to periods of rapid social change, particularly the shift from what he called mechanical solidarity to organic solidarity.
Okay, what's the difference there?
Mechanical solidarity is like pre-industrial society. Small scale, homogenous. Everyone does similar work, shares the same traditions, same beliefs. Social cohesion comes from that sameness, that strong collective conscience.
Got it. Simple, shared values.
Right. Organic solidarity is our modern, complex, industrial or post-industrial society. Lots of specialization, a detailed division of labor. We're all interdependent, like organs in a body, but we don't necessarily share the same day-to-day lives or beliefs. Cohesion comes from functional interdependence.
And the transition is messy.
Very. As society rapidly modernizes, the old rules, the mechanical solidarity, crumbles faster than new rules, new norms appropriate for organic solidarity can be established and agreed upon. That period of moral confusion and uncertainty is anomie.
Okay. Then Robert Merton took that idea and really applied it to American society, right? With his theory of anomie.
He did. Merton's theory is hugely influential. He argued that anomie, or strain, arises specifically from the interaction between two key cultural elements in America. First, the strong cultural emphasis on achieving material success, that goal of wealth.
Which we talked about, yeah. It's pushed hard.
Very hard. And second, the social structure that limits access to the socially proved, legitimate means of achieving that success, things like higher education, good jobs, professional careers.
So the culture says, get rich, but the structure says, well, maybe not you.
Yeah, that's the conflict in a nutshell. And Merton said, when faced with this gap, this strain, individuals have to adapt. He outlined 5 specific ways people cope, 5 social adaptations.
Okay, what are they?
First, and most common, is conformity. These folks accept both the cultural goals, success, and the legitimate means. They keep striving, playing by the rules, even if success seems unlikely or far off. They buy into the system.
That's probably most people.
Probably. Second adaptation, innovation. These individuals also accept the goal of success. They want the wealth and status.
Right.
But they reject the socially approved means. They don't see a legitimate path open to them, or they choose not to take it.
So they find other ways.
They innovate, yes, often illegally. This adaptation is where much crime fits in: theft, fraud, drug dealing, organized crime. It's about finding illegitimate shortcuts to achieve those culturally valued goals.
Makes sense. What's third?
Third is ritualism. These people have kind of given up on the big cultural goals. Maybe they realize they'll never be rich or climb the corporate ladder, but they rigidly stick to the legitimate means. They follow the rules meticulously.
Like the classic bureaucrat, going through the motion.
Exactly. The hardworking person who shows up every day, does their job correctly, follows procedure, but has lost any real ambition for achieving the overarching cultural success. They're just maintaining their place, going through the ritual.
Okay.
Fourth is retreatism. This group rejects both the cultural goals and the legitimate means. They've essentially dropped out of the race altogether. Merton put people like chronic alcoholics, drug addicts, some homeless individuals in this category. They can't cope with the strain or the failure, so they retreat.
A complete withdrawal.
Pretty much. And finally, fifth is rebellion. Like retreatists, rebels reject both the existing goals and means. But instead of withdrawing, they try to substitute new goals and new means. They want to change the system itself.
So political revolutionaries, maybe some counterculture movements.
Could be. People who actively seek to create a different kind of society with different values and ways of achieving them.
Okay, those 5 adaptations are really clear. Now, Merton's theory focused a lot on the individual adapting to strain. But other theories looked bigger, right, at the institutions.
Yes, exactly. That leads us to institutional enemy theory, or IAT, developed by Mesner and Rosenfeld. They took Merton's ideas, but argue that the problem isn't just the gap between goals and means, it's that the entire American culture is dominated by the economy.
How so?
They argue that the capitalist culture puts such an intense, overwhelming pressure on economic success that succeed at any cost mentality that it permeates everything. Economic goals and values overshadow all other aspects of social life.
And what's the effect of that economic dominance?
It weakens the other institutions, the ones that are supposed to provide social control and moral guidance outside of the market. Think of the family, the school system, the political system, even religion.
They get pushed aside or reshaped.
Yeah. Their functions become secondary to economic ones. Education becomes primarily about job training, not citizenship or critical thinking. Family time gets squeezed by work demands. Community involvement declines. The non-economic institutions lose their ability to effectively regulate behavior or instill non-material values when the pursuit of wealth is the ultimate measure of a person's worth.
The economy basically eats everything else.
That's the core argument of IAT.
Right.
And that imbalance creates a pervasive societal enemy, making crime more likely because the counterbalancing forces are too weak.
Okay, we also have relative deprivation theory. How does that fit into strain?
Relative deprivation brings the focus back down to the neighborhood level, but it's still about strain. It argues that crime isn't just about being poor in an absolute sense. It's about being poor relative to those around you. It's about inequality that you can see.
So living in a poor neighborhood right next to a really wealthy one.
Exactly. That sharp, visible contrast between the haves and the have-nots in close proximity can breed intense feelings of injustice, resentment, and deprivation among those who feel left out.
Even if they're not starving, they see what they don't have.
Right. And the theory suggests this relative deprivation, this feeling of being unfairly disadvantaged compared to your neighbors, is a powerful predictor of crime rates, especially for things like robbery or violence, potentially driven by that envy and anger towards the perceived winners.
Okay. And finally, under the strain umbrella, there's general strain theory, or GST. This sounds like it broadens the idea of strain beyond just economics.
It does. Robert Agnew's GST is really influential because it focuses on the individual's actual experience of strain and stress, and how that leads to negative emotions, which in turn can lead to crime.
So it's not just about failing to get rich.
No. Agnew identified multiple sources of strain. Yes, there's the failure to achieve positively valued goals like wealth or status, but there's also strain from experiencing negative stimuli, things like being bullied, abused, victimized, living in a dangerous environment.
Things happening to you.
Right. And third, there's strain from the removal of positively valued stimuli, losing a job, a relationship ending, the death of a loved one. All these experiences can create negative feelings.
What kind of feelings?
Anger, frustration, depression, anxiety. What Agnew called negative affective states. And GST argues that crime is often a way of coping with these awful feelings, lashing out in anger, trying to alleviate depression through drug use, seeking revenge.
So the crime is a response to the emotional pain caused by the strain.
Exactly. And crucially, GST also considers why some people cope with strain criminally while others don't. It points to factors like individual personality traits, someone with a hot temper, low tolerance for frustration, poor coping skills.
They're more likely to react badly to strain.
They're seen as more crime-prone because they lack positive, non-criminal ways to manage those negative emotions when strain hits. They might not have the social support or the personal resources to deal with it constructively.
GST seems pretty comprehensive. Does it have weaknesses?
It's generally seen as a very strong theory, yeah. It explains a lot more types of crime than just economically motivated ones. But one key criticism our sources mention is that it still struggles sometimes to fully explain gender differences in crime. Well, men and women often experience different types of strains, and they tend to react differently emotionally. Men might be more likely to externalize strain with anger and violence, leading to traditional street crime. Women might be more likely to internalize strain, leading to depression or anxiety, or perhaps different kinds of offending that aren't always captured well by crime stats. GSK acknowledges this, but explaining that difference fully is still an ongoing challenge.
Okay, that makes sense. So we've covered social disorganization, the broken environment, and strain, the frustration of blocked goals and negative experiences. What's the third major branch?
The third branch is cultural deviance theories. And you can think of this one as kind of synthesizing elements from the other two. It asks, okay, if you live in a disorganized neighborhood and you experience strain and blocked opportunities, how do you adapt culturally?
So it's about the collective response, the group values that emerge.
Exactly. Cultural deviance theories argue that people in deteriorated neighborhoods facing social isolation and economic hardship often develop their own distinct subcultures. These subcultures have their own unique set of values and norms that provide status and meaning within that local context, even if they clash with mainstream society.
And these unique rules are called conduct norms.
That's the term Thorsten Selin used early on. Conduct norms are the specific, often unwritten rules that govern daily life within a particular subculture. How you're supposed to act, how to handle disputes, what earns respect.
And the conflict comes when those rules bump up against the law.
Precisely. Culture conflict happens when the conduct norms of a specific group are directly opposed to the rules written into the official criminal law of the dominant society.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about a subculture where personal honor is paramount, and any insult absolutely must be met with immediate, perhaps physical retaliation to maintain respect. That's the conduct norm. But the wider society's criminal law calls that retaliation assault or battery.
So what earns you respect in your world gets you arrested by the outside world.
That's the core conflict. Your survival and status mechanism within your group is criminalized by the larger legal system.
Walter Miller tried to detail these specific lower-class values, didn't he, with his focal concerns?
He did. Miller argued that lower-class culture wasn't just a failed version of middle-class culture, but a distinct culture with its own unique value system, shaped by the realities of their lives. He identified 6 key focal concerns that he believed drove behavior and conferred status.
Okay, what are they? Let's tick them off.
All right. First, trouble. Basically, getting into trouble and dealing with the consequences was a fact of life, and how you handled it mattered. Second, toughness. Emphasis on physical strength, being fearless, rejecting sentimentality.
Heard?
Third, smartness. Not book smarts, but street smarts. The ability to outwit, outcon, hustle, survive using your wits on the street. Fourth, excitement. The search for thrills, risk-taking, breaking up the monotony of daily life with gambling, fighting, drinking. Fifth was fate. A sense that life is largely out of your control, determined by luck or external forces. What will be, will be. And sixth, autonomy. A strong resentment of external controls, authority figures like police or teachers, a desire not to be pushed around.
It's important to see these not as bad values, but as adaptations, right? Ways to navigate a specific environment.
That was Miller's point. Smartness meant street survival skills, not academic failure. These concerns reflected a system where status was earned locally, based on peer approval within that environment, often completely separate from middle-class standards.
And this idea feeds into theories about gangs and youth crime.
Definitely. Albert Cohen's theory of delinquent subcultures is key here. He focused on status frustration. His idea was that lower-class boys especially go to school and are judged by middle-class standards, neatness, politeness, ambition, delayed gratification. Standards they often can't meet because of their background.
So they fail by those standards.
They experience status frustration. And Cohen argued that delinquent behavior, forming gangs, acting out, it's a collective reaction against those middle-class norms. It's a way of gaining status and self-worth within their own peer group by deliberately rejecting and inverting the values of the system that rejected them. It's a protest.
Turning failure into a different kind of success within the group.
Right. And then Clyard and Olin built on this with their theory of differential opportunity. They agreed with Merton that people in all classes generally want success, but they emphasized that lower-class individuals don't just have limited legitimate opportunities. They also have differential access to illegitimate opportunities.
Meaning, not everyone can easily become a successful criminal either.
Exactly. Just like legitimate opportunities are structured, so are illegitimate ones. Whether a kid can join a successful criminal enterprise depends on the neighborhood they grow up in.
Okay, so what kinds of illegitimate opportunities might exist?
Cloward and Olin said this differential opportunity structure leads kids, especially those facing strain and status frustration, to join one of three main types of delinquent gangs or subcultures, depending on the neighborhood's characteristics.
What's the first type?
First are criminal gangs. These tend to form in neighborhoods that are disorganized, yes, but have a somewhat stable, established adult criminal underworld. There are older criminals who serve as role models and provide connections.
So there's an apprenticeship, almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
These gangs focus on utilitarian crime theft, extortion, drug dealing for profit. It's rational, organized, aimed at making money. There's a kind of illegitimate career ladder available.
Second type?
Second are conflict gangs. These pop up in the really unstable transient neighborhoods, Shaw and McKay's transitional zones. There's no stable adult criminal network to learn from or integrate into.
So no clear path to profit-making crime.
Right. So how do you gain status? Through violence. Conflict gangs are all about fighting, turf wars, building a tough reputation. Respect comes from being feared, from dominating rivals, not from organized criminal success.
Makes sense. And the third type?
Third are retreatist gangs, or subcultures. Cloward and Olin saw these individuals as double failures. They haven't succeeded in the legitimate world, and they haven't managed to succeed or find a place in the criminal or conflict subcultures either.
So what do?
They retreat. Their focus becomes consuming drugs, dropping out, detaching from the struggles of both worlds. It's a subculture built around shared failure and escapism.
Wow. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground. We've got the history, the stratified reality, and these three big theoretical branches: disorganization, strain, and cultural deviance. Let's try to bring it together now. How do we evaluate these theories overall, and what are the real-world policy implications?
Yeah, evaluating them. Yeah. Well, on the plus side, these theories have been absolutely revolutionary for criminology. They fundamentally shifted the focus from just blaming individuals to looking at systemic problems, social structures, neighborhood conditions.
And they seem to have a lot of research support, right? The links between poverty, neighborhood decay, inequality, and crime rates are pretty well documented.
Generally, yes. There's strong empirical support for the core ideas. They've massively influenced not just how we think about crime, but also how we try to prevent it.
But they're not perfect. What are the main criticisms, the caveats we need to keep in mind?
Two big ones stand out in the sources. First, and maybe most importantly, the vast majority of people living in lower-class, disorganized, high-strain environments are not criminals. They don't join gangs. They don't commit serious crimes.
So the theories struggle to explain conformity in those tough conditions.
Exactly. They're better at explaining why crime happens than why it doesn't happen more often in those areas. There must be powerful protective factors, strong informal controls, sources of resilience within those communities that the theories maybe don't fully capture or emphasize enough.
Okay. What's the second major criticism?
The second one often revolves around that idea of a distinct lower-class culture, like Miller's focal concerns. Critics argue that this risks oversimplifying things, maybe even stereotyping.
The idea that there's just one single unified culture shared by millions of diverse people.
Right. Urban life, even in poor areas, is incredibly diverse. Lumping everyone into a single subculture with a fixed set of values might mask important variations in beliefs, adaptations, and how different groups cope with hardship. It's a complex debate about structure versus culture.
Fair points. Okay, so despite those critiques, these theories have had a huge impact on policy. So what does this all mean when we try to actually do something about crime?
It means policy has to think bigger than just arresting people. If the root causes lie in social structure, then the solutions have to address that structure. It pushes the focus towards prevention, towards creating opportunity, towards fixing the environment.
So how does that translate into actual programs or approaches?
Well, if strain theory points to the gap between goals and means, one obvious policy direction is to try and close that gap. That means things like direct financial aid welfare, food stamps, housing assistance, aimed at reducing economic strain on needy families.
And job training education programs.
Absolutely. Anything that increases access to legitimate opportunities, trying to integrate people, especially the underclass, into the mainstream economy.
And what about addressing social disorganization directly, fixing the neighborhood?
That's the other major policy angle. It involves real investment in high-crime inner-city areas, trying to improve the physical environment, cleaning up blight, improving housing, creating safe public spaces, but also, crucially, trying to strengthen those local social institutions.
Bolstering schools, community centers, maybe supporting local leadership.
Exactly. Our sources mentions specific models, like the Communities That Care, CTC model. That's a strategy where communities actually assess their own specific risk factors, like is it family conflict, academic failure, lack of opportunities, and then implement coordinated evidence-based programs designed to target those risks and strengthen protective factors, aiming to build up that vital collective efficacy.
So it's about empowering the community itself.
Ideally, yes.
Yeah.
And finally, think about community policing. This is a huge policy shift directly influenced by these theories. If you have deep mistrust between residents and police, a key part of that culture of poverty and cynicism we discussed, then traditional policing might just make things worse.
So community policing tries to.
It tries to bridge that gap. Get officers out of their cars, working with residents, schools, churches, local businesses to identify and solve local problems together. The goal is to build trust, increase police legitimacy, foster that sense of shared responsibility for public safety, rather than just reacting to crime calls, building institutional and public social control from the ground up.
Okay, so wrapping this deep dive up, we've seen crime not just as individual choice, but as deeply interwoven with the social environment. We've looked at the three main strands.
Right. Social disorganization.
Yeah.
The breakdown of neighborhood structure and control.
Yeah.
Strain. The pressure from blocked goals and negative experiences. And cultural deviance. The emergence of alternative value systems in response.
And they all point back to the power of the environment, the social context, over just individual pathology, which brings us back kind of full circle to that idea of collective efficacy.
That really does seem like a key takeaway. That sense of mutual trust, shared expectations, willingness to intervene. It's the community's best defense.
Which leaves us with a final thought, maybe a challenge for you, the listener, to mull over. If collective efficacy, this mutual trust and shared responsibility, is so crucial, how can we realistically measure it, let alone cultivate it, in communities that have faced decades of neglect, disinvestment, and have deep, historically justified reasons to mistrust institutions? Especially given that cynicism and helplessness we talked about in the underclass.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do you build genuine trust and partnership where the foundations have been so eroded? It really pushes us to think about what true community empowerment looks like versus just top-down programs. Definitely something to keep exploring.